In the Nancy Guthrie case, the most reliable witness on that porch wasn't a person, it was a plant. The FBI released 2 images from Nancy Guthrie's own front door camera, a masked figure standing in almost the exact same spot on 2 separate occasions. Investigators couldn't say for certain if those images were from the same night or 3 weeks apart. Not from the man, not from his clothing, not from anything he did. They found their answer next to him, in a small, leaning cactus that one online investigator says shouldn't have been leaning at all, not if both images were from the same night. So what could a potted plant possibly prove that a masked man's own image couldn't? Here's what makes it worse. Nancy had no cloud subscription on her Nest camera. Whoever staged this was counting on that, counting on nobody but Nancy's own phone ever seeing an alert. And Nancy never opened that app that night. If she had, she would have seen the light blink. She would have called the police. She never got the chance. By the end of this video, you'll see exactly what that plant may have revealed, and why it could be the most overlooked piece of evidence in the entire Nancy Guthrie case. And why, if that timeline holds, this wasn't a random break-in at all. It was a plan that had already been running for weeks, before anyone, including Nancy, ever noticed. This is Casebreak Network, breaking cases following every leads. Her home sits at the end of a long, winding desert road lined with cacti, in a community that goes completely dark once the sun sets. That's where this starts. She was dropped off around 10 at night on January 31st, after a family dinner. Her garage door opened, then closed behind her. For a moment, everything looked ordinary. Then, sometime after midnight, her doorbell camera went dark. What the footage showed next is where the case actually begins. A masked figure, armed, wearing gloves and a black backpack, standing at her front door. He tried tapping the camera loose with his hand. It didn't work. So he held a flashlight in his mouth, reached down, and covered the lens with foliage already growing beside him. What's strange here is what he didn't do. He didn't break the camera. He reached for what was already growing beside him and used it to hide his face. That's not panic. That's someone who had a plan for exactly this moment. And that backpack wasn't generic. The FBI described it down to the brand and the capacity. A black 25-liter Ozark Trail Hiker pack. That's an unusually precise detail for federal investigators to release this early. Sit with that for a second. Blood was later found on her porch. DNA testing confirmed it was Nancy's. By late morning, she still hadn't shown up. Not for church, not for the live stream she never missed. Her family searched the house themselves before calling anyone. Her wallet was still there. Her phone was still there. Her medication, the medication she needed every day to survive, was still there. Her car never moved. Whatever explanation exists for an 84-year-old woman vanishing in the night, it isn't one where she simply walked away and forgot to take the one thing that kept her alive. Retired FBI agent Lance Leasing reviewed the footage himself. He said the man in the video was not a career criminal, though he added that committing something this severe still requires a certain mindset. If you were reviewing this footage yourself, would you have noticed the plant beside him before you noticed the man? Sit with that question. We're coming back to it. We should tell you what unsettled us most going into this. It wasn't the mask or the gun. It was one of the 2 images, the one where he isn't wearing the backpack at all. No weapon visible either. Same man, it seems. Same spot. Different night, or the same one. Investigators couldn't say. If this was the same night, why would he show up dressed for a kidnapping, and then, in another frame, not be dressed for one at all? The answer isn't in what he was wearing. It's in what was growing beside him, a small, ordinary plant that almost nobody thought to look at twice. Here's what a viewer who paused the footage frame by frame eventually found. In the image without the backpack, that small cactus beside him stands upright. In the image from the night of the abduction, it's leaning, visibly, noticeably leaning, toward the plant beside it. That's worth noting on its own. But it gets harder to explain. Google initially told investigators the backpackless image might be from January 11th, nearly 3 weeks before Nancy disappeared. And that's difficult to dismiss, because a cactus doesn't lean overnight. It takes real time, sometimes weeks, under real stress, to visibly droop like that. Then investigators noticed something else. Something almost nobody else caught. Sitting beside that same cactus is a second plant, an agave. And in the more recent image, it's wilting too. Both plants, aging in tandem, telling the same story independently of each other. Google, for its part, walked its own date estimate back. It said it couldn't actually confirm January 11th after all. So here's where that leaves us. The only agency with the actual timestamp data won't commit to a date. And the strongest evidence of a timeline left standing is a plant nobody in the official investigation has centered. If that's true, if this really was 2 visits, weeks apart, then this wasn't one impulsive night gone wrong. It was a man who found his way onto Nancy's porch, undetected, more than once, and got away with it every time. That detail shouldn't matter, but it does. Because Nancy was someone who trusted her own quiet routine, the kind of person who'd lived on that same stretch of desert road for decades without one reason to check her phone twice before bed. In the FBI's own released images, her front walkway is lined with small potted plants. A cactus in a rectangular container, a flowering agave beside it. Ordinary, the kind of detail nobody notices until it's the only thing left to notice. Somewhere in that unconfirmed gap of weeks, Nancy kept watering that same small garden, never knowing she'd already been watched. We have to be honest about something here. Even Google admitted it couldn't confirm that earlier date for certain, so everything built on top of it is an educated guess, not a fact. We're telling you that because the rest of what we're about to show you deserves that same honesty. There are 2 ways to read a man returning to the same porch, dressed almost the same, weeks apart. Either this was patient, disciplined planning, waiting for exactly the right moment, or it was compulsion, someone who couldn't stay away, even when logic said don't go back. Look at how identical his approach was both times. Tell us in the comments, do you see patience or do you see compulsion? To most watching this case unfold, the picture looked complete. One man, one porch, one night, caught on camera, with blood that told the rest of the story. The FBI had their images. The family's timeline matched the footage. On paper, the question of how this began looked answered, except investigators were still holding one photograph that didn't belong anywhere in that timeline at all. Chapter 4 isn't about who was standing on that porch. It's about who wasn't watching the phone that could have stopped it. Nancy Guthrie called this place wonderful. Just months before, she'd sat on that same Today Show couch her daughter anchors every morning and laughed about wild javelinas wandering into her yard to eat her plants. A small, ordinary joy. A woman who'd chosen this quiet stretch of desert on purpose and never once needed a reason to feel unsafe in it. Whoever wrote to police and reporters in the days after Nancy vanished didn't describe a break-in. They described her house, specifically. Details no outsider passing by would ever have reason to know. The first ransom note arrived one day after she was reported missing. It mentioned her Apple Watch, with its white wristband, left on the floor beside her bed. It mentioned a floodlight on her back porch, the exact one that had simply burned out, an ordinary maintenance detail no stranger would think to remember. 2 details that convinced investigators the note was genuine. We need you to sit with that for a second. Not because it's dramatic, because it's the opposite. It's mundane. And mundane is exactly what real knowledge of a house looks like. That note demanded $4 million in Bitcoin. Actually, let's be precise, because the number matters. An initial $4 million, rising by $2 million more if the deadline passed. It passed. Twice. Then silence. For weeks. Then came a second note. Investigators didn't reveal it publicly until June, months after it arrived. This one didn't ask for money. It said Nancy had died. It called her buried with nature. No apology. No demand, just a quiet, almost gentle way of ending the conversation. Behavioral analyst Ryan Carr studied that language directly. He said softened phrasing like buried in nature functions almost like poetry, and that repeated use of the words not intentional often signals the writer's own awareness of what they'd done. And here's the detail that changes everything. Investigators believe both notes came from the same person, or the same group. The same voice that could describe her bedroom accurately enough to be believed is the same voice that later declared her dead. Nancy had somewhere to be that morning, a church service she never missed. That absence was the first thing that told anyone something was wrong. There's a separate man now facing federal charges just for pretending to be part of this. That alone tells you how much noise investigators have had to cut through to find the one voice that might be real. If you want to make sure Nancy Guthrie's story doesn't get buried the way investigators fear the truth has been, hit subscribe. Because what this note reveals next means Casebreak Network isn't walking away from this one until there's an answer. Which leaves one question the rest of this case can't avoid. How do you know the inside of someone's bedroom without ever being invited in? Nancy's home still sits at the end of that same quiet desert road tonight. The porch light still catching the same cacti that once told investigators more than they expected. Somewhere in that house, an Apple Watch with a white band still sits wherever it was left, waiting for a wrist that never came back for it. Everything laid out here, the timeline, the note, the plant, is still theory built on public evidence. The only people who know the full truth are the investigators still working this case, and whoever is responsible for it. It's Sunday morning, and somewhere across Tucson, a pew is waiting for a woman who is never late. The service is about to begin. Her seat sits empty. No one in that room knows yet that she isn't running behind. She is already gone. She never walks in. The one decision Nancy Ellen Guthrie never got to make, the choice to look at her phone one more time before bed, may be the very thing that finally brings justice for Nancy Ellen Guthrie. Because the same camera she never checked that night is now the clearest evidence investigators have of who was standing outside her door. If this case is going to be solved, it's going to be solved by people who refuse to stop paying attention. So subscribe to Casebreak Network, breaking cases, following every lead, because we're following this one until Nancy comes home, or the truth does. If you were on that jury with only the evidence we just walked through, the timeline, the note, the plant, would it be enough for you? Tell us where the line is for you, because investigators are still looking for the piece that crosses it. In the Nancy Guthrie case, a plant told investigators more than a person ever did, and until Nancy Guthrie's unidentified suspect is found, the most honest witness this case has ever had is still standing on that porch, saying nothing at all.